Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the Institute of Politics and the University of Chicago. My name is Zinat Rahman. I'm the executive director of the Institute, and we're so glad to see you this evening as we welcome Governor J.B. Pritzker, who will be interviewed by Wall Street Journal White House reporter Sabrina Siddiqui tonight. And I just want to thank you and a shout out to all our students who've attended our events, our seminars, our different sessions this year. So far, we've had 14 events, and we've engaged about 2,000 students. So keep the intensity up. We hope to continue to see you at a lot of IOP events. And one opportunity is today, after this event, we will be hosting a spin room, which is a space for students to have a conversation about current events and everything you heard tonight at the IOP House, which is 5707 South Woodlawn. So make your way over there if you'd like to partake in conversation and discuss everything you heard today after the event. So with that, for our formal introduction, I'd like to introduce undergraduate student Jacob Steinberg, who's majoring in political science and sociology. Jacob?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest IOP Speaker Series event, J.B. Pritzker, Progressive Governorship. My name is Jacob Steinberg. I'm a second year in the college, majoring in political science and sociology, and I am a member of the IOP Event Committee, Chicago Style, which plans speaker events focused on Chicago politics. I am honored to introduce our guest this afternoon, Governor J.B. Pritzker, and our moderator, Sabrina Siddiqui. Governor Pritzker is Illinois' 43rd governor, having served since 2019. A lifelong Democrat, Governor Pritzker has played an important role in supporting candidates across the state and country. He's also a noted philanthropist, often focusing on children in poverty and education. As Illinois' chief executive, he has been a progressive force in transforming the state. His policy has been wide-ranging, including comprehensive infrastructure reform, clean energy legislation, the elimination of cash bail, an assault weapons ban, cannabis legalization, minimum wage increase, and compassionate health care access for undocumented immigrants and women from other states seeking abortion. As a result, Governor Pritzker has become an impossible-to-ignore Midwestern dynamo in the Democratic Party. Our moderator tonight is Sabrina Siddiqui, a Wall Street Journal White House reporter. Ms. Siddiqui is a Northwestern graduate and has covered the White House since 2019, also working for The Guardian. She received international attention earlier this year for questioning Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on his human rights record. Before we start our event tonight, I want to point out two exciting speaker series events coming up soon. New Faces of Labor from the Hollywood Writers' Room to Staten Island Amazon warehouses on Thursday at 5:30 in Bond Chapel, and Should the United States Support Ukraine, a Matter of Debate, on Friday at noon in the IOP living room. Some brief housekeeping notes before we start. Now is the time to silence or turn off your cell phone. Also, questions will be taken at the end of the event. A microphone will be placed in the audience when it is time for Q&A, so please line up then, and first priority will, as always, be given to students. Finally, for future speaker series events and other opportunities at the Institute of Politics, please check out our website. Now, give a warm welcome to Governor J.B. Pritzker and Sabrina Siddiqui.
Thank you all so much for being here, and Governor Pritzker, thank you for taking the time this evening.
Great to be here.
Let's dive right in because there's no shortage of news to cover. And I want to start actually with a letter that you recently wrote to President Biden requesting more federal assistance and coordination in managing the migrant crisis here in Chicago. So what specifically are you seeking from the Biden administration, and what has the response from the White House been?
Well, I have to say they've jumped on it in a way that I didn't expect, and that's a good thing. There's more that needs to be done, there's no doubt about it, but I wrote the letter because I wanted to be very clear and very public about what it is that we need to help us here in Illinois and in the city of Chicago. One example of something that I said that was really national in scope is that the federal government really needs to take over the logistics of the arrivals of asylum seekers. That is, we can't leave it to the governor of Texas or to mayors in various cities in Texas. We need to make sure that people are being dispersed into places where they can be cared for, where they can get the health care and shelter, and make sure that they have the things they need moving forward. In the city of Chicago and in the state of Illinois, we're a welcoming state. We care deeply about addressing this humanitarian crisis, and we're doing everything that we can. And with the numbers that are being sent here, there just got to be an overwhelming sense that we won't be able to manage as large a crowd as now the governor of Texas and those other politicians are sending us. They've ratcheted up the numbers, sending them to Chicago, and it's clearly a political move on their part, and we just need help. So I wanted to outline that they need to help us with the logistics, making sure that we're distributing folks to places, to nonprofit NGOs that can help all across the country. That's one thing. And then a second thing I might say is that we need those work authorizations to happen faster. And by the way, each one of those work authorizations costs more than $500. You can imagine that an asylum seeker who's here, who isn't able to get a job now, may not have $500, and there are an awful lot of them. So we basically asked for a waiver of the $500 application fee.
You know, you mentioned Illinois is a welcoming state, and to be sure, these asylum seekers are people who are fleeing war, violence, poverty, especially in Central America. But I do want to ask if you think that there need to be any changes to asylum or border policies at the federal level to prevent so many people from coming at once.
Well, let's start with what we really need, which is comprehensive immigration reform. We need to secure the border, but we also need to make sure that we're running a process of bringing people into the United States. Immigration is good for our economy. Let's all stop on that point. We need to make sure that we are bringing people here and allowing them to work. We have jobs. We know that we need more people. You know, if you didn't bring any immigration to the United States, by 2030, our population would be declining. We have always had immigration in the United States. We need to allow it, and it needs to be legal, it needs to be fair, and that's not something the Republican Party honestly seems like they want to do. All they want to be about is, close the border, don't let anybody in. Well, that's so incredibly short-sighted. And by the way, I think there are a number of them that just say that, but actually when they go home to their districts, the businesses in their districts and so many others are saying to them, we need immigration, help us out. But, they're following their leader, Emperor Palpatine. It's disturbing, and the rest of us would like very much to reach a compromise here where, again, we have border security, where we have enforcement at the border, but we also have an immigration plan that brings lots of people into the United States.
I mean, it's really challenging to get consensus around immigration reform. I covered the debate in 2013. That was perhaps the last comprehensive effort on both sides of the aisle to get immigration reform done. But ultimately, anytime this conversation happens on Capitol Hill, a deal falls through. Now you have a Republican-led House. Pretty certain a lot of the proposals you just mentioned are dead on arrival. So in light of that, should the Biden administration be doing more? Should President Biden be doing more through executive action to I think, help improve some of the challenges in the immigration system that you're speaking to?
Yes, but some of it requires funding, and only the Congress can make that funding available. And so you've got to work with Congress to make it happen. Of course, there are things that the executive branch can do on its own. But I have to say the president is looking for all of those things that he might be able to do. You need to have Republicans and Democrats working together. I know that seems almost impossible these days, but it is what is necessary. Now, I hope that what's happened in the House of Representatives with the 8, I don't know what to call them, rogue, crazy right-wing Republicans that have essentially overturned the election of their speaker, that as a result of that turmoil, that maybe people will come to their senses. Maybe people will say, we need to get back to working together and not having the extreme right wing controlling the Congress. And I think that if that could happen, and I'm ever hopeful, that we could see some immigration reform. And it's the moment to do it, by the way, right? Because we know that we need border security, and we also know that we need to have immigration reform. And I think people can come in from both sides, each party, and actually find some middle ground. Again, we need funding also for enforcement and also to help us move people through the asylum seeker system so that we can get them to the point where they might be able to work.
And you said the White House did respond fairly quickly to your letter, but I did want to ask if you're concerned that the burden that finding shelter for these migrants here in Chicago is placing on the city could potentially interfere with or overshadow its ability to host the Democratic National Convention next summer.
We will manage it, but as I've said before, we have the city and the state working together. We need the federal government at the table here. And it's not just for the city of Chicago and about a convention. This is also about New York City. It's also about Washington, D.C. It's also about Denver and many other cities. This is just not something that we can let fester. And I know that the White House understands that. And as you saw, after the letter that we delivered, there was a lot of action on their part. And I'm hopeful, watching the follow through, that we're going to see some positive effect for us.
And lastly on this, have you spoken to the president directly on this subject? And after you sent the letter, did you hear from President Biden?
I did not call the president after I sent the letter. I did talk to many of the leaders in the White House before that, and I have spoken with the president several times over the last 13 months about the need for help for all of our cities. It is not right that you've got Republican politicians at the border, mostly Republicans, who are sending busloads of people only to Democratic cities and Democratic states. That's not right. This is a federal government responsibility, and the president does understand that, and so they're now taking action that I think will be helpful.
And I brought up the Democratic National Convention, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you how important of a moment that is going to be for the city of Chicago.
Well, all of you who are involved with IOP, I hope you're going to get involved with the Democratic National Convention. It's a great thing for the city of Chicago. And Chicago has hosted more conventions, Democratic and Republican conventions, than any other city in the country by far. And it's because we're a great city. It's because we have great accommodations for hosting something like that. And we made a mighty pitch, beating out Atlanta and Houston and New York City for the convention. It's a great thing for the city. We have 50,000 people that are coming. We have lots of people who are engaged in the activities across the city of Chicago as we move toward the convention. More political activity, engagement is good for Democrats. And nominating Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for another term in office in Chicago is perfect. We're the blue wall. We are the center of the blue wall. And Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, think about how those states have moved toward the Democratic Party. And it has been with Illinois becoming, electing more Democrats and being the center of the activity for the Midwest, making it, a Democratic stronghold.
I will come back to policy, but now that we're talking about the election, and there's a lot of focus on President Biden and his seeking a second term in office, many polls, and this is before he officially announced his reelection campaign and since, you've seen in those polls concerns from a majority of American voters and a majority of Democrats about his age and a preference in many of these surveys, a majority of voters to see someone else at the top of the ticket. What do you say to those voters?
Well, I think, of course, we have more than a year between now and the general election. And one of the things that we'll be reminding people is that Joe Biden, number one, this is genuinely the most empathetic president that I've seen in my lifetime. This is someone who genuinely cares about working families, cares about people, and he demonstrates it in so many ways. We ought to have a leader that demonstrates that to people. It's who we are, I think, as a country. The majority of people believe that. That's number one. Number two, Joe Biden, because he is experienced, and some people want to say, oh, look at his age, but look at what he's done in his lifetime, and importantly, in 2.5 years as president of the United States. Look at what he's gotten done, more than most presidents get done in 8 years in office. Bipartisan legislation that rescued the economy, that's helping to bring manufacturing back to the United States, that's building on our clean energy future and investing in future technologies. That couldn't have happened in a divided world that we're all living in unless you had somebody who knew how to talk across the aisle, and he got bipartisan support for most of the things that he's gotten done.
And I think it's worth noting that President Biden's most likely opponent appears to be former President Trump, who is only 3 years younger than President Biden. But on the potential for a rematch of the 2020 election, I know it's early, the polls can only tell us so much, but what does it say to you that President Biden and former President Trump appear to be in a statistical tie in most, not just national polls, but even key battleground polls, a lot of those states that you mentioned a few minutes ago, even though former President Trump has been indicted 4 times?
Well, let's remember that we have not gotten into the head-to-head competition of a campaign. That just hasn't happened. You've got a mess going on the Republican side, and you've got on the Democratic side, Joe Biden, who's got a lot to manage in the nation and in the world, and he's doing the job. And I think that when we get to the point where we're actually having the head-to-head matchup, not in a poll, because playing that polar coaster game of looking at every poll and wondering if this means the death of one of the other of the candidates for getting elected is not a fruitful endeavor. You know that back in 2011 at about this time, everybody said Barack Obama is done. He couldn't possibly get reelected in 2012. And he went on to a stunning, a really successful election. So I think that there's a lot of time that this is going to play out. And I think reminding people what's at stake hasn't really happened yet.
One of the key messages that you've heard from President Biden's reelection campaign, even in these early stages, is that the economy has really improved under his watch. And we've seen that, working at the Wall Street Journal and all of the economic coverage that we have at my paper, consumer confidence is high. There's been, very positive job growth, wages are up. But at the same time, there seems to be a disconnect between how the economy is performing and how voters actually feel about the economy, which remains, still what they rank as their top priority, that and inflation, which also has fallen, from its high a year ago to now, roughly just under 3 points under President Biden. So why do you believe there is this disconnect? And is the Democratic Party somewhere failing to really adequately sell its accomplishments with respect to the economy?
Again, there hasn't been a campaign yet. So let's be clear. Donald Trump left us in a world of hurt. At the end of his term, this country was in terrible shape. And one of the reasons for that is that he was unwilling and unable to help manage one of the most serious crises that we've faced in this nation. It was Joe Biden that rescued the country, both health-wise and the economy. You saw, at the Wall Street Journal, you have the statistics. We were heading into a Great Depression. And it was Joe Biden that helped to rescue us from that, and importantly, to make sure that people got vaccinated. And, the kinds of crazy things that get said on the other side of the aisle about, the Nobel Prize winning vaccine that was developed, where people think that that's about injecting microchips into people's arms. That's what he was promoting, that crazy notion. And Joe Biden was all about the science and also making sure that we're getting people back to work. And boy, has he done it. If you look at the statistics, right, he's created more jobs in the last 5 presidents and by far. And so I think that, again, when you finally run a campaign, because the day-to-day of just the news in general doesn't give you the comparative. And once we get to comparing these 2 presidents, one who is again, someone who carries empathy and wears it on his arm, and the other who makes fun of disabled people and who attacks people who've been, wounded veterans. I think that people will understand that they need to step up and save democracy and vote for Joe Biden.
One issue that's been drawing attention both at the campaign level and also here in the Chicago area is the United Auto Workers strike, now in its 4th week, also impacting plants here in the Chicago suburbs. All 3 companies at the center of the strike have laid off hundreds of workers at this point across them. So what do you think the end game is here? What would you like to see?
Well, sorry, just to back up, there's a strike going on, so there are people who are striking who aren't working, and then there are suppliers who, if they're not building vehicles, right, then those suppliers are laying people off.
They've cited the strike as part of the. Some of the companies have cited the strike in announcing some of these layoffs.
Oh, there's no doubt. All I'm pointing out is that, look, this is something that, the auto workers have felt left out and left behind by the creation of the electric vehicle industry, in which the UAW really hasn't been able to participate. And so there are a lot of people who are being underpaid at some of those battery plants or at some of those EV plants that are not part of the UAW. I believe that people deserve a fair wage, and the UAW is trying to get that fair wage. Now, I realize I've been in negotiations as the state of Illinois with the unions on the other side of the table and as a business person before, and you've got to reach compromise and you've got to be rational with one another. And I know there's sometimes vitriol that takes place, and this has taken too long to resolve, but it is the right thing. We are getting closer and closer to, I think, a compromise. You've seen that recently with some of the announcements, GM coming to the table, Stellantis too. So we're close, but it's painful. It's painful for the people who are on strike. It's painful for the auto industry. It's painful for the broader economy. And this is something that we're going to have to resolve soon, because it could sink the economy if they don't finally get to the table pretty soon.
You mentioned what is at the heart of, or one of the issues that is certainly at the heart of these ongoing strikes, which is the potential impact on manufacturing jobs when you talk about this broader shift to electric vehicles. And you've highlighted Illinois as a leader in the emerging EV industry. So looking at how this strike has played out, how do you balance that vision with these concerns around preserving jobs as the auto industry shifts to batteries over time?
Well, there's no reason why we can't have an EV industry that has unionized labor. And we do, by the way. There are union manufacturing plants in the EV industry in Illinois. But look, I do believe that it's not the government's job to say that there should be an agreement between labor and management. It's their job to come together. It's our job to make sure that it stays on course and that they finally reach agreement. So we're excited about what's happened in Illinois. Rivian went from being an almost nothing company to hiring more than 8,000 people in Bloomington Normal. That's a big deal for Illinois. Lion Electric, which I talked to for many months and attracted to the state, and they're a great company from Canada, and they're making electric buses in our state. Navistar, as you may know, is also making trucks and buses and is headquartered in Illinois. And then, of course, Stellantis had a plant that was open in Belvidere. And as part of this wrangling between management and labor, they closed that plant. And that really caused upheaval for 1,400 people in Belvedere. And I've been working both with the UAW and with Stellantis about reopening that plant. And I believe and hope that when there is an agreement, a national agreement between UAW and Stellantis, that we will see real progress in Belvedere.
And you said you think we're getting closer to a deal. How much closer? Weeks, months?
Listen, I'm not in the room. I don't want to suggest to you that I know exactly what's being said across the table, but I certainly call a lot of people to try to get a feel for it because it really does affect the future of our EV industry in Illinois, and I think that is where we should be focused. And in Illinois, I mean, we've been trying to attract suppliers and assemblers, manufacturers, battery makers to the state, and we've been successful at doing that. And if there is an agreement reached, we're going to see more and more of that.
I wanted to bring up a policy question that stemmed from the other strikes that we've seen in California that pertain to the film and entertainment industry. Yeah. But Governor Newsom, governor of California, of course, recently vetoed a bill that would have given unemployment pay to striking workers. Mm-hmm. As a matter of principle, do you believe that striking workers should be provided with unemployment pay?
Look, it's not something that we have here in Illinois, but it's also something I believe that, when there is an unfair labor practice that's going on and that's, caused a strike, it is something that I believe we ought to perhaps look at. But I also believe that we can bring people together to avoid those strikes. We don't have that kind of a problem in Illinois that they had in the entertainment industry in California that's caused this national strike. I will say Illinois has been rising steadily since I took office, and I'm very proud of this. We extended the film and TV tax credit in Illinois, and one of the results of that is that we now have a record number of people who are employed by the film and TV industry. It's 700,000 people that are variously engaged in that industry in Illinois. I believe that we can do much better than that. Sorry, did I say 700,000? $700 million of activity, and very importantly, we have the potential to reach $1 billion very soon because our rivals like Georgia are really struggling where we are really growing.
And, kind of shifting gears a little bit from the issue of labor rights, I do want to talk more about your record here in the state of Illinois. We heard about some of it in that great introduction, and you've enacted a number of progressive policies since you took office, including an end to cash bail, a ban on assault weapons, legalizing recreational marijuana, becoming a sanctuary state for women seeking abortions, and expanding health access to undocumented immigrants. So when you kind of take a look at these issues, which I want to dig deeper into, one thing that a lot of people have observed is we are in this very polarized environment nationally, and there's a sense that blue states are getting more and more progressive, and red states are shifting in the other direction, getting more and more deeply conservative. Do you feel like we are at a point now where we are, in essence, living in two different Americas?
The great sort, as we've seen. I do think that there are people who are choosing to leave places like Texas and Florida, which are taking away people's rights. I mean, if you're a parent of a transgender child, why would you stay in Texas? Why would you stay in Florida? If you're a woman who's seeking to exercise her reproductive health rights, why would you stay in Texas or Florida? And we can name lots of other states like that right now, or Missouri or Iowa. The fact is that I do think it's important for us to make the case to people that they should move to our state. But here's what I would say to you. When you say, well, the red states are moving redder and the blue states are moving bluer, I mean, does anybody think Georgia is getting redder? I don't think so. Does anybody think Texas is getting redder? I don't think so. And in fact, those two are great examples of a real shift that's happening in the South, where if we can protect voters' rights, right? Voting rights in those states and many other southern states have excluded people of color or tried their best to do that. And there have been case after case after case that's been brought to protect their rights. And the more we do that, the more we're going to see people step up and go vote. And believe me when I tell you that across the South, that there are an awful lot of Democrats who, if they show up at the polls, we will win. So I understand that there's a lot of vitriol between the parties, and a lot of that, in my view, was brought on by Donald Trump and his failed leadership. But I also think that, that we ought to be looking for ways to reach across the aisle, to work together. I've tried that in Illinois, I have to say. We got a lot done in a bipartisan fashion in 2019, my first year in office, because I sat down with Republicans and tried to work with them to make sure they were getting things done while we were. In 2020, when COVID hit, it's like they all ran for the hills. It was, because of Donald Trump, in my view. There were early moments of COVID where there was a lot of collegiality and working together, and then it became a partisan endeavor in which people were, calling out crazy things like microchips that ultimately would be injected into you, or that we're trying to suffocate people with masks. The reality is that we did better than most states in Illinois because of the COVID rules that we set. And that's mostly because of people in this room and people across the state doing the right thing.
And let's talk a little bit about some of those issues that I mentioned with respect to your record here in Illinois, and I especially want to touch on Illinois having become the first in the nation to end cash bail. Why was that such a priority for you? Well,
I have to say that cash bail has not worked in this country. It just hasn't worked. Here's what happens. As you all know, if you're poor, you end up stuck in jail. That's just how bail works. And so that doesn't seem fair at all, because the person who's not poor, who commits the same crime, is out maybe the same day or the next day. I think we all understand that's not fair. Now, at the same time, remember, ending cash bail also means that people who've committed heinous crimes, murder, rape, et cetera, they get kept in jail. It's not that, it used to be that they got bail. Maybe the bail was set high, but again, if you could afford it, you were out. And the whole system is turned upside down as a result of this, failure of bail working across the country. So it has worked to end cash bail in certain cities. And so we worked on making sure that we did that here in the state of Illinois. And honestly, so far it is working. There is a lot of adjustment that needs to be made. States' attorneys are not used to having to go in and make a case for keeping somebody in jail who is a flight risk or a danger to the community. They're not used to having to make that case. They would just go in and say, we want this much bail. Right now they have to actually make a case about why someone needs to be kept in jail. And judges, it's new to them too, right? It was also something where they would just sit there and put numbers next to each case and say, well, this is the bail for this one, this one, this one, this one. There's actual work that has to go into it. And so this is an adjustment that we're making, but so far it is working.
You mentioned some of this, but cash bail, many studies have shown disproportionately affects Black, Latino, and low-income people. It certainly gained a lot more attention at the national level in the aftermath of the police killing of George Floyd, as there was this broader national debate around racial justice reform and also criminal justice reform. It's been more than 3 years since the killing of George Floyd and the nationwide protests that we saw across the country, and yet at a national level, at a federal level, there really hasn't been any meaningful change with respect to police accountability and racial justice more broadly. What else do you think needs to be done, both here in the state of Illinois as well as more broadly across the country?
Well, at the federal level, there's divided government. This is, if you want to know why we haven't made a lot of progress at the federal level, it's that. Republicans have decided to turn this issue into something. By the way, 10 years ago, the Koch brothers made this an issue that they favored, criminal justice reform. And Republicans, because they were getting a lot of money from the Koch brothers network, were coming to the table and working on this. And then what happened, that money sort of went away, or at least they changed their view about criminal justice reform, and they all disappeared. It was all about the money, and they all disappeared on the subject. We in Illinois have been able to make real change, and I think very, very positive change. Again, this is about fairness, and we've been one by one going after how to make sure that poor people, that people who live in communities that have been left out and left behind are not caught up in the justice system in a way that's been unfair for too many years. And so we've done a lot on criminal justice reform, have fewer people in prison because, again, if you're a drug addict, what you need is treatment. You don't need to be sitting in jail or in prison. You need treatment. And so, we've done as much as I think up to now we've been, able to accomplish because we've worked with people to educate them about this, but it's mostly been a partisan endeavor, and it's unfortunate.
Another issue that has been stalled for, probably as long as any of us in this room can remember on Capitol Hill is the issue of gun control or stricter gun laws. And, we talked about the ban on assault weapons here in the state of Illinois. Now, often what you hear from gun rights advocates is when they are speaking out in opposition to stricter gun laws is that you look at, a city like Chicago and you look at the rate of gun violence in Chicago, these are their words, is that not evidence that some of these stricter gun laws don't actually work?
Here's what it's evidence of. We need national gun safety laws. We need a ban on assault weapons nationally. We need to have, switches banned nationally. 60%, there is real statistics out there that you can look at. 60% of the violent crimes committed with guns in the city of Chicago were committed with guns that came from Indiana because they don't have any gun safety laws, really. And for goodness sakes, Florida, where everybody's wearing a gun, you can wear a gun anywhere in Florida in the open. Literally, they don't allow those stickers on the doors in buildings that say you can't bring a gun in here. You're literally prohibiting people from bringing a gun somewhere. So you could be, in the grocery store and, 17 people are walking around with a handgun. And by the way, you've seen this in the Capitol in Wisconsin and in Michigan, where people are allowed to carry AR-15s at the Capitol, right? That's allowed. So we need national reform. And we've done what we can do. There's more that we could do, but we've done the things that we've done in the state of Illinois because we think it will make a difference. But it's false to say that if there's gun violence in Chicago, it means that all of that is a failure. What it means is guns are pouring in from outside. Every state around us is a Republican-controlled state. Kentucky has a Democratic governor, but I believe, supermajority Republican legislature. Wisconsin, same thing. So these are Republican states, and there's not a lot that we can do from Illinois to affect that. But at the national level, Joe Biden is in favor of, for example, a ban on assault weapons. And I've talked to him directly about how we could accomplish that.
And one other issue that you have raised is your record on LGBTQ protections here in the state of Illinois. You were talking about some of the proposals that Republicans have pushed at the state level, targeting the LGBTQ community, including restrictions on gender-affirming care, bans on transgender youth participation in sports, these so-called bathroom bills. And this has actually really become a centerpiece of the Republican presidential primary. And I'm just curious, one, why you think that is, and two, how concerned are you about that messaging and that rhetoric and its impact on this debate more broadly across the country?
Why is it? Because they don't want to talk about the real issues, so they make things up. The Facebook fakery that goes around among Republicans is crazy to me. The things that I see that are completely false, and particularly on this issue, that there's, that someone's promoting that people become transgender. That nobody's doing that. And there have been protests at one of the great children's hospitals in the country that has a program that helps families who have a transgender child or believe that their child might be transgender. And there are protests outside and on Facebook threatening to attack the doctors who run the program. And let me just tell you that the parents who come to a program like that with their child have gone through so much to get there. Their child sometimes has tried to commit suicide because they didn't know what to do, because no one in their community, their own doctor, didn't really understand how they should be treated and what they could do for this child. And so they come to this program, and literally the program is saving children's lives. And why is it that the Republican candidates can't understand that we ought to let people live how they want to live and let parents manage the challenge of their own child's, whether they're transgender or they might have, other challenges that they need to get through. But why do we not, they talk about how we're, taking away parents' rights. They're the ones who are attacking parents. And we need to call that out. And I can't tell you why exactly that this has become a thing in the Republican Party, because it used to be the Republican Party was, even if I disagreed with them, a bunch of rational people. I now no longer believe that, or at least the majority or those in control. And I'm very deeply concerned about that. We need, two functioning parties, and right now we don't have one of them.
I have one more follow-up question on this, but I know we're going to be taking some audience Q&A in very shortly. So if those of you who have questions want to line up, I would go ahead and do so. But on this subject, it kind of takes me back to the earlier question I asked you about this idea of two Americas. You mentioned there are people who are moving to Illinois if they're seeking gender-affirming care, or if they're seeking access to abortion, and you hear sometimes from factions of Republicans that maybe they're moving to Florida or they're moving to Ohio if they don't want to see some of the more progressive policies that you've enacted in their state. If they don't want to see, they don't want to see transgender children participate in youth sports teams. So doesn't that concern you? This pulling apart of the country, and kind of bringing it back to President Biden. He often says, I've covered him for a long time, that this country, was founded on an idea. It's a great experiment. Are you concerned that the experiment is at risk of failing?
Look, in order for us to get past this, we've got to break the fever that has overtaken the Republican Party. And the only way to do that is to beat them. Plain and simple. We have got to go, Democrats have got to go beat them. That the extreme positions that people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I'm just naming a couple, but think about those that just go along with this, right? And the ones that have given up and decided, well, whatever Donald Trump says, I'll have to go along with. And of course, privately, they'll say, I don't believe in any of that. And then publicly, they go vote for it. So we have to break the fever, and yeah, it's challenging, and there's no doubt about it. There are people that I know in politics in Illinois who are Republicans who, seemed like they were willing to come to the table and work on things together, who now feel they can't or they shouldn't because they'll get voted out of office because of what's going on within the Republican Party. They need to fight that out, there's no doubt about it, and we, in the meantime, have to go beat them. They will sort it out when they realize that they're just wrong and the voters see them as wrong.
My last question to you before we open it up here. There's been a lot of, I know you're supporting President Biden right now, but there have been a lot of questions about your own political ambitions. And do you plan to run for president one day?
Listen, I love...
I went right for it. I didn't.
You did,
man. I'm gonna beat around the bush here.
Okay, all right. I love being governor of Illinois, I really do. And I wake up every day with the opportunity to lift up people in this state, and we're heading in the right direction. Our fiscal situation is so much better today than it was 5 years ago. And I'm proud of that fact. It's allowed us to do many of the things that you mentioned that we've been doing, making sure that we have social services that people can, access, making sure that we're able to take care of people who developmentally disabled, for example, who otherwise couldn't get state services. I mean, we were, I don't know if any of you remember, but $17 billion in overdue bills that the state had just shortly before I came into office. So today we have eliminated the overdue bill backlog in the state of Illinois. We've balanced the budget 5 times in a row. All of that has allowed us to move forward, and I want to keep us moving in that direction. So I'm focused on being governor of the state of Illinois and re-electing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
But not a no. All right, we're gonna, thank you guys, thank you so much. So we're gonna take some questions now. Why don't you go ahead and please, of course, introduce yourself as you ask a question.
Sure, hi, Governor Pritzker. My name's Jessica. I'm a 2L in the law school, and today we actually read a case that was featuring a merger and acquisition with your Uncle Jay. So great to get to talk to you today. So I love that you talked about clean energy, and I know that the environment is something that's on a lot of people's minds, especially a lot of the young people here. And I think that something that we really can't get away from if we're really gonna turn this situation around is animal agriculture. And I know that a lot of other leaders are looking at how we can invest in plant-based systems, especially considering that, I mean, reading the news lately with like a lot of the child labor and just like terrible things that have been happening in these facilities with the population growing. Of course, they're going to be more consolidated and it's going to all turn into factory farming. How can we address this as a state?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, because this is certainly a challenge all over the country. And I don't know if you read recently that Upside Foods, which is developing, more than developing, they have developed already the ability to make, animal, meat from cells rather than, as you know, the kind of farming with animals that causes so much environmental damage. So I'm proud that they chose to come to the state of Illinois. This is just one of many in the agriculture field. These are one of many things that we need to address. But I also want you to know there's a huge industry in the state of Illinois. I mean, both on the animal side, and of course, we're the #1 producer of soybeans in the country and #2 producer of corn. And FYI, the #1 producer of pumpkins in the country, and horseradish. And so the agriculture industry is very important. So whatever transitions we may need to undertake, we really have to be careful. This is, about justice also for those farm communities. So again, I think there's a balance, and we'll have to go after it, but it's not going to be an immediate thing that we just shut people down and move to some other, plant-based only replacement for animal protein.
Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, at 2L at U of C, I went to the other law school up in Evanston. Actually, I was in the downtown campus, and my father was a U of C law school graduate. And I have to say, those 3 years were 3 of the toughest years that I've had in school. I hope you're getting through.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to alternate from down here and up on the balcony. Do we have any questions up on the balcony as well?
Hello, Governor Pritzker. I'm Mitch Robson, a 4th year at the college. I'm a physics major and actually also a molecular engineering major at your Mag school. I wanted to ask, just over 2 years ago, you signed into legislation a set of bills that your office described as establishing Illinois as the most welcoming state in the nation for immigrants, which included funding illegal immigrant students financial aid with taxpayer money and restricting local and state governments and how they can apprehend illegal immigrants. More recently, you penned a letter to Joe Biden saying that the burden of illegal immigrants has been laid quote, upon a few certain states run by Democrats, which is untenable. But that's not fully true because for years, Florida and Texas have had higher illegal immigrant population percentages than Illinois. So I'm wondering, is the reason that you kind of reversed on this issue simply because it's now causing myriad problems in your own state, or is there some other reason?
Well, I appreciate your question, and I think I know from where it comes. I will just say that I believe that we have to help, for example, the state of Texas and the cities in Texas, just like we need to help other cities and states to manage the incoming immigration to the United States. By the way, you called these folks illegal. These are undocumented people. There are many of them in the United States already. They were here for many years, and they should be treated like human beings. They should be given an opportunity, a path towards citizenship. This is all about having comprehensive immigration reform. And in the absence of that, we as a state need to help manage and help these folks to get an education, to try and get a job legally. And we have DACA recipients in the state that I believe we should just immediately give them all citizenship. And there's so much more that we need to do. But what you're describing is not as if blue states believe in immigration and red states don't. The challenge, I know that what's going on in Texas, the challenge is there are an awful lot of people that are in Texas, and it's not just the recent challenge of asylum seekers who are legal, I might add, in this country. Asylum seekers are legal in this country, right? We have undocumented immigrants, and then we have documented asylum seekers. We need to manage all of that, and it has been a failure of Republicans and Democrats, and we all need to come together to solve this problem. Now is the moment to do that.
Thank you. I agree. It's a failure of both parties.
All right, next question, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Cameron Landon. I'm a third year in the college, and I currently serve as president of College Democrats here on campus. So my question is, recently the Princeton Gerrymandering Project gave the Illinois congressional map an F rating and classified none of the state's 17 congressional districts as competitive. In a recent article, the Washington Post claimed that this has hollowed out the political center, pushing both Democrats farther left and Republicans farther right. In this light, would you consider having Illinois congressional districts as well as other legislative districts in the state be drawn through a nonpartisan commission?
I want to have you pay attention to one really important thing. We did not create the problem that Republicans are having now. They are extremists. Mary Miller, who is a member of that crazy caucus and is a representative here, a U.S. representative here in Illinois, legitimately beat another congressperson to win the seat. He didn't run as good a campaign. Donald Trump was very popular in the area and chose to endorse her over the other Republican in that primary. That challenge is happening with Republicans all over the country, and they're the ones who have this problem. I mean, like I said, there's a fever in the Republican Party, and in those primaries, you're seeing it. I think there's a race going on in Southern Illinois right now between incumbent Republican Mike Bost, and his Republican opponent, Darren Bailey. And I think one might say that what is going on here? This is the Republicans eating each other alive. So that article, I want you to look at the chart that's in the middle of that article. That chart shows the states that they said were gerrymandered. Do you know how many of them were Republican gerrymanders versus Democratic gerrymanders? I mean, it was like 3-1 Republicans over Democrats. So this is a national problem. If you're going to solve for redistricting and the problem of redistricting, you have to do it at the national level. It cannot be done state by state because we would be unilaterally disarming as Democrats if we did that. Now, I happen to believe that we should have independent commissions, but the truth is that when I do it, Indiana isn't going to do it, Iowa isn't going to do it, Alabama's not going to do it. I mean, maybe we should pair off Republican and Democratic states, but the fact is it's got to be a national solution.
Thank you.
George and I get it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up on the balcony.
Good evening, Governor Pritzker. Thank you for coming to Hyde Park and the U of C. My name's Kenneth Newman. We've met a few times before. So I have not been really happy with your approach to the migrants. I really want you to, the state of Illinois, to go after Texas and Governor Abbott. I think he's abusing people by sending them all over the country. But I'm more concerned about our CPS students and their lack of athletic facilities citywide, which leads to people going to prison. So I've been trying to have a meeting with your deputy governor of education, and that guy has refused to meet with me. So I was wondering whether you could help get that happen.
I love that you got a microphone in this room to make an appointment with my deputy governor. I love that ingenuity. Terrific.
I have tried, just wanted you to know.
So I understand, and I want to hear what your views are about that. And I will just say, one of the challenges, I mean, just broadly, because I can't address the specific thing that you'd like to talk to us about, but I will say broadly, I mean, we still are underfunding our education system in Illinois. I mean, massively, and we have this program that increases evidence-based funding program that increases funding every year by $350 million, and we've been doing that as much as possible. Indeed, we've done it virtually every year, and more than that, we've put more money into education broadly since I became governor, and I've only been in the office 4.5 years. We've increased funding for public education by more than $2 billion. And that's a big amount of money. It's a more than 20% increase. So, there is a lot that we need to do that's underneath that, just here's more money, right? We need to make sure that we have arts programs. We need to make sure that we have facilities, as you're talking about, for gyms, making sure that we have sports programs. But there's an awful lot of Illinois that just can't afford to do it, and it's because of the way we fund our schools. It shouldn't be funded by, I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I want everybody, there are a lot of smart people in the room. When I took office, about 25% of funding for education in Illinois was coming from the state. In the average state in the United States, it's 46%. 25, we were the worst in the country at 25%. Most of the rest of that comes from what? Local property taxes. There's about 8 to 10% that comes from the federal government. But most of it is local property. You wonder why local property taxes are so high in Illinois. It's because the state got out of the business of funding education. And if you don't fund it, you can't provide sports and arts and everything else. So I came into office, and by the way, the cupboards were bare. It's not like there was some treasure chest of money somewhere that we could spend on this. So you really had to balance the budget and make sure that we were running surpluses so that we could put money into education. And that's what we did. And I want to be clear that we've made real progress. We've gone from 25% to little over 30%. That's a big move when you're talking about a more than $10 billion state appropriation for education. So we have more to do. There's more to do. And when we do that, by the way, it helps bring down local property taxes while also funding our schools. So I know that's a lot to digest, but just understand that it is my passionate goal, that I'm really focused on making sure that we're funding our schools properly, which is the beginning of the answer to what you're talking about for CPS. Yep.
Thank you. So fun little moment. We have a lot of questions and hopefully time to get through as many as we can.
I'll try to keep
So I was just going to say, any other appointment requests, hopefully we can make offline. And feel free to keep the policy questions coming. Go ahead over here.
Alrighty, good afternoon or good evening, I guess, Governor Pritzker. My name is Max. I am a third-year student at the University of Chicago, majoring in public policy. I am an aspiring politician and public servant. So Chicago, like many cities right now, is facing an extreme housing crisis. And Illinois as a whole is facing an extreme housing crisis as well. A lot of displacement going on, housing insecurity. Growing up, I was also insecure with housing, so I kind of relate to this issue a lot. Yep. Do you have any plans or proposals to begin fixing this problem in Illinois? And if so, what are they, and why do you think they could work? And do you think this maybe is an issue that could use more federal support as well.
Yeah, let me remind everybody that we're not alone in Illinois. You talked about Chicago, you talked about the rest of Illinois. We're not alone in Illinois. There's a housing crisis in the country right now. So there does need to be more that's done at the federal level. I don't want to push, the answer to just the feds. I introduced and got passed in this last budget something called Home Illinois, and it's really focused on ending homelessness in the state of Illinois, and that includes a bunch of levels. It's not just, let's build a bunch of shelters. This is about really at every level making sure we have transitionary housing, making sure we have shelters, of course, for emergency housing, but also getting people into actual homes that they can own. And so we have, between the Illinois Housing Development Authority and the work that they're doing to provide subsidies to people for down payments and for managing their mortgages, to this Home Illinois program where we're helping cities to functionally end homelessness. Rockford, Illinois, if any of you are from Rockford or know people in Rockford actually is the first city in the country to functionally end homelessness. That's pretty impressive. And we're trying to replicate what they're doing. It's a national endeavor, but Rockford happens to have been the most successful. We want to do that all over the state. And so that's part of the answer to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to the balcony.
Hello, I'm Bhargavi. I graduated from the policy school in 22, and I'm currently working with a lot of community healthcare centers and also people with lived experiences on either Medicaid or Medicaid churn. And I can give some context, churn being people losing eligibility due to certain circumstances, such as them experiencing homelessness or changes in income. And during the pandemic, the federal government came up with this policy where nobody's going to experience churn. And you personally have worked with undocumented individuals, providing them access to healthcare. And so this is a two-part question. One, because the federal policy has come to end this year, and we did see that in Illinois, because of that continuous coverage, there was an increase in healthcare coverage for individuals. One, because that policy is coming to end, how does Illinois see covering individuals for healthcare? Two, again, because we have undocumented individuals that we are supporting and our state is supporting, how do we, again, provide healthcare for them?
So in both of those areas, we've made a lot of progress. One is the redeterminations that you're talking about. People, just for everybody's edification, during the pandemic, the federal government said, it's too hard to redetermine, which is something you do every year for someone who's on Medicaid. Are you still eligible for Medicaid? During the pandemic, the federal government said, we're not going to do redeterminations, and you are not required in the state to do redeterminations during this period of time. That's now coming to an end. It's ended. We essentially have to do redeterminations and are in the process of doing that. We've been very successful at keeping people on Medicaid in the state of Illinois as we're doing these redeterminations. That is, making sure we're doing a great job of finding people. You talked about people who are homeless, who may have gotten Medicaid coverage, but now you can't find them to redetermine them, and therefore they'll drop off. So we're doing, I think, a pretty good job of identifying those folks. More to be done. Working with local organizations to make sure, because they're the ones who know where these homeless folks are, that need to go through redetermination, then helping them through it. So redeterminations is one big piece of that. And then you talked about undocumented immigrants and the coverage that we're providing to them. We basically created a program in Illinois that provides, I would call it Medicaid-like coverage, because you're not allowed to give Medicaid coverage to people who are undocumented, federal law. But we nevertheless have provided a program for people essentially 42 and older. And so we have been working very hard to change the structure of that program so that we can cover more people by virtue of lowering the cost per person. When the program was created, nobody thought it would grow to the point that it's at. And it isn't run under a Medicaid-like kind of cost containment and we needed to do that. We're now in the process of engaging that, and I believe that we're going to see real results going forward so that we can reopen those programs to more people who are undocumented.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully just time for a couple more questions, and if we don't get to you, we're very sorry, but we'll try and get through as many in this little
Nobody's
time
asked a yes or no question.
Yes, I said. If you can keep them concise, that might help us cycle through a little bit more. Thank you.
Hello, Governor. My name is Tyler Shastine. I'm a second year in the college and also a resident of small town Carterville in southern Illinois. So as someone who has 4 siblings who were adopted through the foster care system, I'm deeply concerned with the continued issues that system has seen through the years under your administration. According to several court orders, many children are being locked in psychiatric hospitals and temporary shelters for more than a year. According to CBS Chicago, 41% of children were moved 4 or more times in their span in the child welfare system here in Illinois. 7,000 children were placed 20 or more times, and 44 children were moved a whopping 100 times through the foster care system. How do you justify these ongoing issues and the apparent lack of progress despite a massive increase in the funding for the Department of Child and Family Services and several campaign promises to overhaul and fix this system?
So I appreciate the question, and this is something that concerns me deeply. In fact, as you may know, for 20 years before I became governor, this department has been neglected. And indeed, when I came into office, I looked at this and brought in experts actually from the University of Chicago, from Chapin Hall, to help us evaluate what we ought to fix and how it should be fixed. And to be clear, these are not things that you can snap your fingers and fix overnight, especially, I'll give you an example. You talk about people being moved from one place to another quite a lot. You have to have beds available. I know we're running out of time, but I just want to say, you have to have beds available when you take somebody out of their home because there's abuse or neglect that's alleged. You need to be able to put them into some sort of housing situation. And it's not like there are a whole bunch of families that just have their doors open to anybody. We have facilities, beds that the state of Illinois had in years past. When Governor Rauner was governor, because of the 2 years without a budget, most of those beds went away. And just to be clear, when that happens, those organizations use those beds for other purposes, right? And now we came back at it to say, hey, we need 100 beds. By the way, we lost something like 600 beds. I say beds, but facility opportunities for kids to be placed. Short answer to this is that we've been working at reinstating those contracts. And it is hard to do because these are literally, it's brick and mortar trying to get contracts. These are organizations that were shorted by the state. They weren't paid. So now the state comes back and says, we'd like to have a contract with you to provide services. And their answer is, we did that once, we can't afford to do that again. We almost went out of business. So this is a real problem, right? And so we've looked at lots of different ways to try to address that. I don't want to suggest to you that we are on the golden path to success yet. I will say we've made a lot of progress. Just to give you one example, we have a hotline. If you witness or believe that there's abuse and neglect, you can call that hotline to report it. Mostly there are mandatory reporters, right? People who are required to report. Teachers are an example of that. We looked at this and 50% of the calls were going unanswered by the state. 50% of the calls that people were making to the state, people would leave messages and maybe they'd get back to them, a week later. This is a huge problem, especially if there's real immediate harm. So we completely changed that system, and now more than 99% of those calls get answered on the first call. And I'm very proud of the change that we've made, but it's like there are about 83 things that need to change at the Department of Children and Family Services. And we've been able to check the boxes on some of them, but not all of them. But an important part of it is you got to fund the department so that we can hire more, and we have, investigators, and make sure that we've got the right kind of care that we can provide to these kids. It's going to take a little while longer, and as you know, we're going to be out looking for a new department head for DCFS, and I think that offers us yet a new opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we probably have time for one more question.
Nobody's asking easy questions.
Well, these have been fantastic and well-researched questions, I have to say. So this, our last question, I'm sorry if we didn't get to you. I'm going to go back to the balcony and to everyone else. Thank you, of course, for being here and being prepared with your questions. And hopefully another time we'll have another opportunity. Up at the balcony.
Hello, Governor Pritzker. It's nice to be here. My name is Lily Brown. I'm on the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, also known as NCOBRA. I'm the National Youth and Young Adult Co-Chair. And so I understand that the General Assembly recently established the African Descendant Citizens Reparation Commission this summer. And the commission is charged with making recommendations, holding meetings, providing reports, and performing actions regarding the preservation of African American neighborhoods and communities, building and developing vocational centers for African people of descent who are descendant citizens, ensuring proportional economic representation in all state economics, and creation and enforcement of an Illinois slave era disclosure bill. Can you let me know where you all are in that process, even though it just started?
Yeah. Well, obviously, the creation of the commission, allows us at least to not only have meetings of the commission, but also reports. There's an awful lot that we don't know yet for the state of Illinois and how you might go about providing reparations. And honestly, that new commission, I think, is going to be a huge benefit to us. But that's a process that's going to take us certainly a number of months to finally get some real reporting out of a group of folks who care deeply about this and who will help the legislature and me as governor to figure out how we might move forward for reparations and how that would be carried out. Yeah. Do you want to take?
Thank you so much to everyone for being here. And thank you so much, Governor Pritzker, for your time.
Thank you.
Really thoughtful discussion, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do it again sometime.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.